Mr. Ronan Conway, thank you so much for being here.
How are you?
I'm great now. Great now to get to sit talk to you. This has been in the works for a long time.
It has. A year and a half, I'd say.
Is it a year and a half?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, cancellations and postponements.
Absolutely. Well, I'm honoured now to finally get to sit down. We've worked together over the last couple of months, but it's great to be able to sit down and do this conversation with you. I'm going to ask you a question, and I've just been enjoying asking this question the last few podcasts to people like yourself who are, I have a general bracket of classification in my head called human workers, people that work with other people. And I really enjoy speaking to people like yourself because you have such an exposure to a wide range of different people in a wide range of different situations in their life, be it not feeling good or feeling great, preparing for big events, or just trying to figure out who they are. Mm-hmm. So you have a huge level of experience with that. So my question for you is, having worked with all the people you work with in all these different environments, is there anything that stands out to you from a human perspective, some common threads with all humans, no matter where you see them or where you meet them? Is there anything that jumps out to you about people?
Firstly, thank you for having me on, Dan.
It's a pleasure.
Once again. So that's a interesting question. Common thread that I would see in, and just to give people context, my work has been involved in schools with teenagers, sports teams, workplace teams, and also in the prison system. So a common thread that I would see throughout all of those areas are that regardless of gender, background, social class, personality type, passions, interests, we all have the same human needs, and we all have a need to belong and to be connected to people. That is one of the main threads I've seen. And also another one is that everyone, no matter who you are, where you are, I feel like everyone is trying their best to survive in the world. And that looks like that looks different for everybody. You know, we all have different layers of personality wrapped around us that have been built up over years of conditioning. But I feel like all of these protective layers are there for a reason, and they're trying to help us survive in the best way we know.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that, because it's a conversation I've been trying to have a lot lately about this idea of compassion and empathy. And what you've described there really helps me understand that no matter who somebody is or what they've done or how I perceive them, really, from an external point of view, they're just like me. They're going through the same thing. And belonging and connection seems to drive most of the things that we do.
Yeah.
Everything we do is driven by, I want people to either like me or accept me or have me as part of the tribe.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. I asked you this question the last day we were together. What exactly is it that you do? And you described to me this idea of you are a facilitator. What does that mean?
Well, to be fancy, the word facilitator comes from the French word facile, which means easy, to make easy. So a facilitator in a group setting is somebody who makes the process of being in a group easier. There's two areas for my work. Firstly, I work with teams. So I work as a team performance coach with sports and corporate teams. So I essentially help teams to perform at a higher level. And I do so by running interactive workshops with teams. And it's all based around building a sense of belonging and a culture of being connected to your teammate, and being connected to your vision and whatnot. So that's the teams. Separately, I work in Mountjoy Prison, and I'm about to work in more prisons around the country. And I run self-development programs for groups of men. Same craft of facilitation, same skills that I use, but it's just a different lens that you're putting on the camera. So for the teams, you're helping them perform to a higher level. In Mountjoy Prison, for example, the trophy for them, or the goal for them, is to actually become healthier versions of themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the majority of your work with men? Is it men and women with the team? I know the prison probably mainly men.
Yeah, it's mainly men in the prison. And then in the workplace, it's mixed. And then sports team, it's mixed as well. But I would say, to be honest, 70-80% of my work is with men.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because this is one of the areas I really did want to go into, the prison work that you do. This is probably an area that most people have very little insight into, because we don't go into prisons. We don't really know what goes in there. And we all have a perception of what a person who is in prison is like. I watched what was it? Finley McMahon and Rory did. What was the name of the show there on RT?
Gaelic and the Joy.
Gaelic and the Joy, and you were part of this process here, and it was amazing to see you, having met you before and done some work with you, to see you do the work in the prison as well, was incredible. But would you be able to give us a bit more of an insight into the work you do with the people in prison? If it does, I don't know if it does now, but if it differs from work you might do with people who aren't in prison, and how the response that you get and how you feel the work kind of unfolds with men in prison compared to other work you might have done.
Yeah. So I was invited in 2 years ago to the prison by Philly McMahon, the ex-Dublin footballer. I had done a bit of work with the Dublin footballers years previously. So I met Philly, and after one of the workshops that I'd ran with his team, he came up to me and said, would you come into Mountjoy prison and run similar workshops with the lads in Mountjoy? And straight away I was thinking, how could it be similar? These lads are locked up, and they're not going to win it. They're not going towards a shared goal in many ways. So the pandemic hit at that point. So I decided to go back and study, upskill in a way that would help me run some self-development workshops with the lads. So I went back studying with Dr. Gabor Mate for a year. I studied, it's a year-long online course called Compassion and Inquiry.
Do you work directly with Gabor?
No, we didn't. So he would be on some of the calls that you're on.
Okay.
But it's delivered by a bunch of facilitators that you work with every 2 weeks, and then you do one-to-one therapy as a client and a facilitator. Yeah. So you're practicing constantly. And essentially this course is based around Dr. Gabor Mate's experience in working with trauma, addiction, recovery. So that gave me a nice lens to go into the prison with, So before I went in, I wrote a 6-part program for the prison. And I suppose just to kind of zoom out a little bit, and give a bit of context, there's 4,500 men in prison in Ireland today. Over half of the men who were released in 2019 reoffended within 1 year. Wow. All right. So my point is, when people, I'm going to speak about lads particularly here because that's who I'm working with at the moment. It's when men go into prison, and some people might have a 6-month sentence, or people might have a 20-year sentence. When they leave prison, how do we want them to be? Do we want them to be more angry or hurt or traumatized as when they went in, or do we want them to have a bit more self-compassion and healing and understanding of themselves so that they can live a more of an empowered life when they leave? So my role when I'm running a program in prison, which is called the Circle program, is to help those lads in some way to build a healthier relationship with themselves, and just to give a bit more context of, I've worked with groups of men in progression unit, which is it's called St. Pat's in Mountjoy, and they have a few more entitlements than the other lads. And then I've worked in the maximum security area of the prison. But one thing that's common throughout all of the people I've met is that they all come from extremely difficult backgrounds. Majority of the men in there have had very traumatic upbringings. They have very poor beliefs about themselves and the world around them. They've, a lot of time very low emotional intelligence, self-awareness, ability to express themselves, emotional regulation. And, I suppose when I'm working with them, they come in every week. I come into the prison every week, and they come into the room for 2 hours at a time, and we run interactive workshops with them, and we explore a range of different topics, which I can go into now if you like.
Absolutely.
But just for me personally, going in at the start, I was definitely nervous, and I was thinking, who am I to be going in and working with these lads? And, surely they'll just tell me to F off, and but and I was nervous the first day, and I was walking in and seeing the grey walls and hearing all the doors being unlocked in front of you and locked behind you, and the echoing shouting down the corridors as you walk in, and people gazing at you. It was a different experience for sure, but quite honestly, the most fulfilling work I've ever done, I would say.
Why do you find it more fulfilling?
It's the raw impact that you can have. I personally speaking, like the raw impact you can have on somebody's day. So like these lads are locked up for between 18 and 22 hours a day. So when they get let out at their breaks, they have a choice if they want to go to the gym or go walk around the yard, or they can come to a workshop like this. So when they choose to come to a workshop like this, that's an honor in a way that they've decided to do this. So like for that hour and a half that they're there, if I can help shine a light into their dark world, which it often is inside of there, that's a huge honor for me. Like, and just building relationships with them. Like, I definitely don't want to give them people a free pass and say like they're all amazing. Like, same with anywhere. There's some great people and some troubled people in there, of course, but and a lot of them have hurt people. Like, but like at the end of the day, like, how do we want them to leave? And I really think we need to, there's a duty to invest in these people, give them a second chance, give them a chance to come out and be better fathers and better uncles, better role models in their community. I can go into the topics that we explore shortly, but
100%. What I really find fascinating about this, and I spoke to my partner Jill after watching the TV show. Now I know with TV shows it's difficult sometimes because you're getting a snapshot and there's production involved and there's editing involved and all this sort of stuff, so you're not necessarily seeing straight in the window. But what really struck us was after a couple of episodes, like any TV show you watch, you start to see the human side of these people. And I personally feel like a lot of the time we like to other anyone in society who doesn't align with our own values or whatever. And as you mentioned, a lot of these men are in prison because they've done something to hurt other people. But as soon as you spend a little bit more time, like if you're watching them on a TV show, almost every single one of those guys that we saw anyway, and again, in the context of a TV show, you started to see the emotion or the pain or the suffering behind who they were. At the start of the show, there was a lot of the bravado and whatever, and we're doing this. But the longer it went on, I started to see anyway the vulnerability. These guys were letting their guard down a little bit, and they were showing either that they had regret, that they were really upset. There was lads talking about families they didn't see and children they wouldn't watch grow up, and all of a sudden it's really difficult to order them now. And like you said, you don't want to just give them a free pass. And when that mother, I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen the show, but there's a mother who explains the difficulty she went through having her son wrapped up in all of this kind of stuff, and seeing the reaction of the guys who realised that there was consequences outside of themselves to their actions. It starts to bring that a little bit closer to home for you, realising these are just men. Yes, they've committed crimes. Yes, they're in prison. But to your question, what do we want these guys to be when they come out? And no shade on the prison system or anything like that, but you lock guys in a room for 22 hours a day for 6 months or 20 years. Like, do we really expect them to come out and have found a higher purpose and been able to move forward to life, or are they just going to fall back into their environments? So it was very interesting for me.
There's different levels to it in there as well. Like, some people I feel do need to be like locked up for a certain period of time, but there's some people in there that I feel like, they need the human interaction and to rehabilitate and to heal. So it's complex. It's complex, but like the humanity and the spirit that you see in there is quite inspiring and moving too. Like people's resourcefulness and ability to find a way to get through their day and their week and their years, and again, like, it comes back to people. For me, what I noticed time and time again was people's need and reliance on their fellow cellmate and landing mate to get them through. Like,
really?
Wow. And like it within the workshops that I'd run, that was a real opportunity for them to acknowledge what they all have brought to each other's lives within the prison system, you know.
Yeah.
And that was quite beautiful to behold, because can you imagine being, you know, on a landing for 10 years with other men, and, you know, you're probably talking about certain topics daily, almost automatically, you know, perhaps what's on the TV, football, other lads, officers, and then in the workshop, just giving them an opportunity to maybe drop the mask a little bit, drop the bravado a little bit, and have a different type of conversation, which at the beginning is different for them, and they're sussing it out. They need to know that they can trust me and trust other people in the room. But when they do, and when they know that it's a safe place to be themselves and to drop the persona, perhaps, then real magic can happen, you know. And that's, I suppose, to answer your question, that's what has been fulfilling for me, just seeing some of the moments that take place. When I say this, some people would not be into that. Like, some people would not, you know, that would, you know, that's not everyone's cup of tea but for me, I think it's what I want to do at the moment.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I am in awe of people like yourself who are able to acknowledge the good in people and work to create that safe space. This idea of a safe space is something that's relatively new to me, but it's become so profound in almost every element of my life, because most of what has held me back in my previous years of not being able to maybe connect with my emotions or be a bit more vulnerable is, which I've now identified as, this feeling that I'm not safe. And I can only imagine, like, a lot of these guys exist in a dog-eat-dog world. Like, you can't be vulnerable. You don't trust anybody, because that's a liability. Trust is a liability in a lot of these environments.
Yeah.
So for you to be able to create an environment where they feel safe, because I mean, and we'll get into the team stuff later, but I've experienced that from a team point of view, and even that's difficult. And we're all guys who are there with a shared goal, who know each other quite well. From relatively stable backgrounds and families and stuff like that. We all come together, we know each other, we trust each other to a certain degree. It's still difficult for us.
Yeah.
At the start, we're kind of like, geez, I don't want to talk about this stuff in front of the lads or whatever. This is so much more extreme than that, and yet you still manage to create the environment. Would you mind going into how some of these workshops work and some of the work you do?
So the program's called the Circle Program, and it's got, so the first one that I ran with Philly McMahon, he was running one in tandem on a Tuesday, I'd run one on a Thursday. That went on for 12 weeks. So the one I'm running myself now in the last couple of weeks is like 6 to 8 weeks long. So some of the topics that we'd explore would be, you know, actually first and foremost, when I go in there at the start, my main role for the first engagement with them is for them to understand me and to build a trust with me. And how I do that is essentially let them into who I am, tell them about my path, acknowledge that maybe I've had a different road to a lot of these lads, but I'm here anyway. You know, they like have been hurt probably a lot in their lives, and you know, their trust has probably been broken an awful lot as well. So like, you almost have to work extra hard to assure them that your intentions are good. Like, but what I learned the first day when I was in there last year was I was introducing myself and whatnot, and this guy down the back, there were 16 lads in this small little classroom, and this guy down the back just said, shut the F up. I'm not sure, can I curse in this podcast?
You can curse away, man.
All right, cool. But he said, you don't care. Like, he said, you don't care. And I said, okay, why do you think that? And he said, no one cares. Sure, why would they care?
Okay.
And I said, okay. And you know what? It's a good point. Like, that's what he believed. And he believed that for a very good reason. So like, I didn't say much back to him, but like, I just knew that I'd had to come back every week to show him that I did care, you know. And yeah, so like, that's what the first session would look like. Regarding the modules, first module, like we do, is actually just exploring their life path until now. Okay, pre-prison. So tell us high level what your life path looked like pre-prison. Now I'm conscious that a lot of these lads have had very, traumatic lives and difficult events happen in their life. So there's a certain parameter that you put on that conversation, but you just say, like, if you were to give like a movie trailer of your life, like who was around. So they give like a 2 to 3 minute kind of summary of that, and then we have kind of follow-up conversation of questions and whatnot. And, there's, on a Tuesday morning, there's 16 lads in the prison telling their life story in a way that they've never probably told it in their whole life. And like the power in the room, the vulnerability in the room, the trust in the room, a couple of misty eyes, you can see people's body language softening as they start feeling safer. And as all of the stories are told and people are listening to all of the other stories that are being told by the other men, people's nervous systems, you can feel it them becoming more regulated. Like they're going from fight or flight, worked up, on edge, looking over their shoulder, to feeling safe in the conversation, right? And like, it's a very, you can see it happening, you feel it happening, you can hear it happening. And, say if we finish an exercise like that, like I'll ask them, I'd say, well, how was that for you? And they'll be like, some of the answers were, just feel a bit more acceptance about the path that I've lived now. Realize that maybe it wasn't, that this path was laid out for me in some ways. Some people saying that, like, I've been in the same cell as this guy for 12 years and I never heard him speak like this, and I never knew that he had a brother who passed away like mine, or a dad who left like mine, or and like it's just incredible, like, to watch that. So like this acceptance and the self-awareness that's built in a workshop like that is, in an hour and a half, it's all they're doing. Like, I just ask the questions, but they step in and they do it, and then they leave and they go back to the landing, maybe put the armor back on a little bit as they go back onto the landing, until the next week they come back in and we explore a different topic. So I'll keep going if you want to hear more. So like mentors is a big, quite often used word by them and I. On week two, 2, 3, and 4, like, the lads were talking an awful lot about this guy let's call him Johnny, who was released after 15 years, and he's thriving on the street. And now he's got a job, and now he's about to be a father, and he's off drugs. And they just were talking about Johnny as if he was like the superhero, like going, oh, Johnny this, Johnny that, he's thriving. So, myself and Philly reached out to Johnny then, and we asked him to come in. And the following, like on week 5, he came in and he sat in front of, he actually just walked into the room, and it was like a school reunion. Like, you should have seen it. Like, people going, Johnny, no way, Johnny, I haven't seen you since I was 15. I haven't seen you since I was 21. I haven't seen you, barely recognize him. So then, I just sat him down and like had this kind of informal discussion interview with him, whereby 16 of the lads were sitting there. Johnny was here. And I basically had a chat with Johnny about what his life was like from when he was small all the way up into his teenage years, where he said, like, he was, quote, like the Tasmanian devil. Like, his nervous system was so wound up and from so much trauma from early life that he was so anxious and on edge and about to burst. All the way into drug addiction, getting arrested, being put in prison for 15 years. And I spoke to him about what his life was like in prison, and I asked him about a turning point that he had and how he turned his life around in prison. And then I also spoke to him about what life was like after prison. So, like, for he was only out 6 months, and I asked him just what his life was like after prison, and like, you should have seen the group, like how glued they were. Like, you know, they were hanging on every word that he said, and the reason being is that like this guy Johnny walked their path. Like, he knew the language, he knew the terminology, he grew up in similar backgrounds, he experienced prison, and he was released, and he took the higher road when he got out. Like, he was fortunate enough that he was given opportunities, and he took the right choices. And like, the lads were just like, they said to me at the end, they said, you could bring in a Premier League soccer player to us, you know, every week, and yeah, that's great, but like, bring Johnny in, like someone who we know. It's like, this is what we need to see. So yeah, that was.
He gave them hope.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
That's
he gave
insane.
them hope. He gave them hope.
I texted you a word after one of our sessions together, the word magic. And what you've described there about these lads could have gone through 15, 20, 30, 40 years of life. And that vulnerability, that human element is literally just below the surface. But unless there's an environment created like the one you create, there's potential that will never, ever come to the surface. Like you said, guys in cells together for 12 years, and I've never heard them speak like that before. And 25 minutes in a room like this, and all of a sudden the guys are opening up and they're exploring areas that maybe they've never even thought about before, and learning stuff about themselves. And that's magic, man. And it gives me great hope and faith for stuff like this as well, because it's in everybody just below the surface. But unless you get that environment right, you may never ever get it. And then we'll just judge people, and we'll live our lives in a certain way, assuming this is just how we are, or this is just how they are. But actually, right below the surface, right below this little learned protective layer that we all put up here, there's the human element to everybody. That is magic.
Yeah, it is. And like, when, like, I don't think that I'm a magician in like, I actually just think and to just give a nod to where I've learned these skills is like, I worked with the SOAR Foundation with teenagers for 8 years. And I essentially spent 8 years learning how to facilitate workshops, interactive workshops, and build engagement and build interaction and have people contributing in these experiences. So like, you might say magic, but it's actually like there's skills to it, like which I would credit like so many people in SOAR, Tony Griffin and Tom Harkin and Sinead Murray for helping me along the way, learning the skills, still learning the skills.
Well, to give you more compliments, there's going to be a lot of them in this conversation, but it's one thing learning the skills, it's another thing being able to implement them in a way that actually has an impact. Lots of us know skills, but don't necessarily apply them in the right ways. Yeah. And there's a manner about you, there's a way about you that just seems to settle the room and allow that stuff to come out. I've personally found that, but it's definitely something that's not overly common, but is wildly effective. Like, it has such an impact on people.
Yeah, good.
You made a comment there about some people being locked up, and I won't go too deep into this, but are there cases, maybe you haven't met them, but are there cases, the more extreme cases, where this is not enough? They need more. I know a lot of these people maybe don't engage with these programs, so it's hard to gauge it, but like, are there cases in the human condition where it's a bit too extreme?
For something like this?
For something like this.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Really?
Like, yeah, okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is not an elixir, like, at all. I always, I was thinking in progression unit, the group I worked with, I think they were generally in a better place to receive this work, because they were for the most part not taking drugs, and not they weren't using substances, and their level of recovery before they came into the workshop, the program, was at a higher level regarding like just their self-awareness, and their relationship with themselves is at a certain level. Whereas in other landings that I was working in, there's, a lot of drug use going on in the prison, and, officers and people would tell you that, like, there is quite a lot of drugs in the prison. And that other landing that I worked in, they were less able to receive the work. Still worth going in, I believe, because, even if it's going to impact some of the percentage of their day, I feel it's worth it. But for a lot of cases, I feel like one-to-one counselling and therapy like is an absolute must, and like the therapists and counsellors in Mountjoy and the prisons are doing a great job, like well needed, because the group setting isn't for everyone either. But
And just to explore the impact of environment as well, you mentioned the figure, was it 40 to 50% of reoffenders?
50, just under 50.
Just under 50% of people reoffend.
Within a year.
Within a year.
Yeah.
So obviously, just as a society, we were thinking forward with this. You have someone who comes through the progression unit who works with you, who feels a bit, Johnny aside, Johnny I would imagine is the exception to the rule, goes back into the environment that stimulated or caused or provoked all of this in the first place.
Yeah.
It's going to be extremely hard. I even find personally, like if I do some good work in whatever context that is on myself or in a group setting, and as soon as I get into my car, you're back in that familiar environment of stress and the phone's ringing and there's people beeping, and even that small impact, I start to revert back to my behaviours. The shields come back up online, and it's hard for me to bring the lessons I've learned and the stuff I've explored back in. I can only imagine it's 100 times harder for somebody who's in maybe a low socioeconomic environment, or they go back out into the people, the groups or the gangs or the family that they had before.
Yep. So interestingly, for the last 2 years, listening to their stories and situations, the one thing that is common as well, like they're all looking forward to getting out in some ways, but surprisingly, so many of them have said the word scared about getting out. And I've asked why, and they're nervous of falling into the same patterns again and going into the same environment, family, friends, community, and just becoming part of that cycle again. Like 70% of people who came into prison in 2019 have a substance addiction. 70%. So hopefully that might have changed by the time they get out, but if it's teetering on the edge, or if it's even if they are fully recovered, it's they're going back into the same. Again, it comes back into the people and the environment around you have such an impact. But I'll give another nod as well here to a friend of mine, Damien Quinn, who works at Sparanua. He's spent time in prison himself, but since getting out, he's just done Trojan work regarding post-release support services and helping people to find a pathway back into work and employment. Because when you think about it, Dan, something I wasn't aware of is that of the 4,500 people who are in prison at the moment, 2,500 of them are serving a sentence less than a year. Okay. So why I say that is when they leave, and by the way, they might have been in prison for not paying their car insurance. Okay. Right. They might have got a 6-month sentence, but when they leave, they have that stamp on their, I suppose, on who they are regarding when they're applying for a mortgage, when they're applying for car insurance.
They've got a record.
They have a record, and that's going to impact their life after that 6 months so much, and that's why I say Damien Quinn's name, because he's really helping to give them a second chance, and also just give them a clearer roadmap back into, becoming contributing members of society.
It's why I really, really like to have this conversation with someone like yourself, because oftentimes we think about it, again, I mentioned how we tend to other these people. So when they do reintegrate into society have a perception of who they are. So already they're branded as different than us. This guy was in prison. There must be something about him that I don't want to associate with, which is going to reinforce that idea for him that he's different. And there's that environmental part of it. So I often like to explore this idea of, yes, we need to rely on services, but realistically, are we ever going to get to a level where there are services for all of these people? It's very, very hard. Our systems are under massive pressure already. Yeah. So how much responsibility as a society do we have to help these people reintegrate? As much as it might be difficult, because you might be the person who's been wronged by one of these men.
Yeah.
So that's obviously extremely difficult.
But as you said, Johnny as an example, somebody took a chance on him when he got out of prison after 15 years, and he has a job, and
Yeah.
the purpose and the confidence in his eyes when he was speaking about his job. You know, and his job allows him then to have a child, which he now has, and you know, yeah, and to get a mortgage and whatnot. So yeah, like it's yeah, he's a good example of somebody who like actually prison did work, you know, and he came out, I think, a better man. Yeah, but it's just to kind of give them that pathway when they leave so that it's not going to impact their lives too much.
Yeah. And it's actually, I never actually thought about it like this before. This is coming to me as I'm speaking here, but I mentioned earlier on, I like to explore this idea of personal responsibility, but we are very quick, and I say we because I include myself in this, we're very quick to point the finger and outsource the responsibility for everything to the government, the doctor, the system, all this kind of stuff. We know it's already overloaded and under massive pressure, and we're pointing more fingers. And yeah, maybe there's some inefficiencies in there, fine. But what if we as a community took a little bit more responsibility for example, these people, or for the people who aren't as healthy, or for our elderly, for example, like other communities and cultures do? Man, we could have a massive impact.
Yeah. Well, community service, you know, service is, you know, I think... like from my limited exposure in the prison system, one thing I would say that I think could be very beneficial is that for those who are getting those 6-month sentences or a year, and, you know, they're not at risk to themselves or other people, and maybe it's, for example, car tax, whatnot, like, you know, community service, like, you know, really, like, it costs the taxpayer 80,000 a year to house a prisoner.
One prisoner, yeah.
One prisoner for a year. So it's like, if we can actually reinvest in these people and not isolate them and put them into cells, and also potentially definitely exposing them to people who are deeper down the line of criminality, you know, it's like there has to be other options regarding, like, I think, the community service part.
Yeah. I'm not asking you for an expert opinion because I know you mentioned you've limited experience here, but is that something that's been discussed at the moment? Is there something that's on the table in terms of maybe broadening the horizon of what we can do with people who, like, this white collar crime stuff? Like, it's not the same to murder someone as to not pay your car insurance.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of lumped in the same bracket because it's just easier for us to categorize a criminal as a criminal.
Yeah. No, it's just casual conversations I'd be having with some people in the area.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, is there any kind of policies being passed? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Maybe that's something we can go out and protest for. To move to a different environment, with a similar kind of context, the work you do with teams. I read an interesting bit by Jack McCaffrey when he's speaking about the work he did with you, and he was talking about how you came into what was already an established and highly successful group of men, and still had a massive and profound impact on what they did and how they did it. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because it's a completely different context, but a lot of the principles are pretty similar.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of rewind, give a bit of context. So I worked for 8 years with teenagers, so facilitating emotional intelligence workshops with teenagers, and then coming towards the end of that 8 years, which is in 2019, I was invited to work with various teams. Some inter-county teams and club teams, and they asked me to design programs which would help build a sense of connection in their environment. So, like, going back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, like, we're tribal people, and, like, being connected to another human being and having a sense of belonging in the tribe was not just for the crack, you know, or for a bit of fun. It was actually a matter of survival. You know, they probably didn't have the lingo of emotional well-being back then, but it was certainly kept, you know, if you knew that you were safe and connected in your tribe, your nervous system would be regulated, you'd be feeling healthier in yourself. So that's the well-being side of it. But, like, feeling connected and belonging also has a huge performance enhancer. When you have a culture, a team culture, whereby people come and they feel valued, respected, appreciated, that their opinion is heard and welcomed, that there isn't some huge hierarchy and they're down the bottom of it. Like, when they feel like a proper sense of belonging, that for me is a huge performance enhancer. Because sports teams, if we're taking sports teams, they have the physical, pumping iron in the gym, doing the shuttle runs. You have the tactical, you have the technical, but like this is the cultural side of things that I work in at the moment with teams.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's I had this conversation the other day with Patrick McCowan as well about the breadth, and he's starting to work with a lot of high performance athletes and teams now as well. And he's like, it's so interesting that for years and years and years, anybody in the top echelons of sport, particularly, are always looking for the extra 0.5%. Like, is it the slightly lighter shoes that Adidas makes, or the fucking nutrition, or taking this supplement or whatever? But what you've described there is like a massive pillar of performance, is this idea of acceptance and feeling valued. And I can speak to that as an athlete as well. It's completely shifts how and why you apply yourself to the goal, to the sport, to the training, to the whole thing. And it's not something external. It's not something you can take or necessarily do. It's more about that feeling that you have on the inside.
Yeah.
And it's such a huge part of performance. That's why what Jack said is I thought it was so interesting. Here's a team that are so successful, and yet when I first heard your name, it was sitting actually right here with Paul Flynn and Garrett Roach, and they brought up your name, and Paul lit up, absolutely lit up, and so did Garrett. And I was like, what? This is why are these guys who focus on like the minutiae of elite performance, your name excited them so much, and now I kind of understand it, because what you do is so fundamental and foundational. Could you talk about some of the experiences you might have had working with these high level teams?
Yeah,
I can.
No, of course. So as you know, like with a sports team, like every season is a journey, right? You're going towards your peak every season. And for a lot of times, like your peak, if you picture going up a mountain, for example, a lot of times the peak for a team will be to win a cup or win a trophy and whatnot. And along the way, you have different markers to get there. So like you might have different games, and there's the next challenge and opponent is always around the corner. In the environment, then on a weekly basis, you have, as I said, you're practicing your gym, you're flexing your physical muscle, and you're building the physical muscle. Like you're working on the tactics and technical side of things. And that is a very important, it's vital, to be honest. Of course, it's absolutely vital, and it's very functional, and it's very head orientated and body orientated. The part for teams that what has been reported back to me is like the part that lose all of those areas together is actually the emotional side of it. So like if you imagine, again, going back to going up a mountain together, if you had a group of 40 people going up a mountain together and you're trying to get up to the top of your peak, what I would ask teams is what do you think you need? What qualities do you think you need as a group? And what do you think they say?
What do I think they say?
Yeah, or what would you say, even like if you're trying to get to your peak, what do you think like a group of 40
teamwork, communication, trust, now having worked with you, vulnerability, emotional connection, intelligence. But like I think what most people go to is the physical stuff. Like we need that teamwork, and we need someone to be a leader, and we need some communication there, and we need all these different skills. I don't, you can tell me, because I don't know how many groups immediately go to like a sense of connection and trust with each other. A bond, a culture, a reason or a why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the invisible stuff.
Yeah, it's
the invisible stuff.
Like,
and so like if you put it like this, if you feel connected and a sense of belonging in your team environment, your whole body is going to be more relaxed and your nervous system's at ease. If you don't feel like you belong and you feel unsafe in your sporting environment, you'll spend a lot of your time and energy looking over your shoulder and wondering about dynamics. Do I fit in here? Do they like me? Should I sit here? And it's all of that is a huge waste of it. What a great book called Belonging by Owen Eastwood, and he speaks about like when people feel like they don't belong, they leak energy out of the environment. You know, it's like wasted energy because you're worrying about dynamics. But when you feel like you belong, you can lock into the task at hand. You know, you can lock into it because you feel secure in yourself in the environment. So yeah, that's setting the scene. So like what I do is I come into teams a couple of times a year, sometimes once, maybe they don't like it and I don't come back. But sometimes, yeah, a lot of the time I come back and I'm in there for the season. And I'll run like 2 to 3 hour workshops with a team. And again, like it's about at the start building trust and rapport and helping them understand that what we're going to be doing, what they're invited to do is actually going to benefit them. You know, I'm not coming in going, okay, we're doing this. This is where you're going. Let's do it. They'll be like, feck off.
Yeah.
You know, but what you have to do is go in and actually say, this is what I think you can achieve. Would you like that? How do we do that? Okay, cool. Well, let's give it a go and see how you like it. So essentially just break up into, you know, one workshop might be about building interpersonal connection with each other. So understanding each other's paths, who they are, who you are beyond the footballer, the hurler, the soccer player. So like, who is the person behind the athlete? You know, as I said, it can be a very functional environment and task orientated. You don't have time to ask, oh, do you have sisters and brothers? Or did you ever live abroad? Or what do you work at? Do you have kids? You know,
Yeah.
You don't get a chance to have those conversations. But when you put like a bit of structure around it, you can find out all of these pieces of gold and you can have all of these different connections with different people. It doesn't have to be the same story, but even when you know it and people are vulnerable and open up, it creates this palpable sense of trust in the room. It's almost like you can feel the trust growing in the moment between people.
Yeah.
So like there's the interpersonal connection with each other, but there's also like, what is your peak as a team? So what is your peak? Are we all on board to go towards that peak? You know, and how are we all going to start like rowing in the same direction towards that peak? Like, so there's connection to each other, connection to the vision of where you're going, but also like building a connection to the higher purpose of what you're actually doing together. So like, what is the deeper meaning of you all showing up playing hurling, football or soccer together? Is it because you want to make your family proud? Is it that you want to make your kids proud? Is it that you want to influence the neighbours and the stalwarts of the club and bring a smile to their face? You know, like when you tap into those deeper whys and the deeper meaning of playing sport, it offers a huge performance enhancer and motivator for people. And when you have 40 people sitting in a room talking about this, quite frankly, it's just incredibly powerful. You mentioned the word tribal earlier, like it is a tribal thing, like, and you can almost feel like people are about to go into battle.
Yeah.
You know, which can be, you know, you don't want them to get riled up too early either before games, but like you can feel like people are ready to go into battle together because they want to fight for each other.
100%. Yeah. I'll put a pin in the tribal bit for a minute because I do want to circle back around to that. I would describe it almost as a lifting of the veil when you mentioned the why. A lot of the conversation, I'm not going to dig too much into the session we did, but for me personally, a lot of the impact came across. You need some more water?
I'd love some.
You can steal my one.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Nice one.
Was a realization of how many people this thing that we were doing impacted. It wasn't about us necessarily. It was about us, but actually when we thought about it, and personally when I thought about it, I started to see around the club all of the people were invested. I really started to see, even in my own family, how much this meant to my family and my extended family, which I'd always known on an intellectual level. But just from having the thought brought to my kind of forefront of my consciousness working with you, I was like, wow, this is way bigger than me. This whole thing is bigger than me and bigger than all the lads and bigger than the team and everything. And over the next few games, I was like, it was, as I said, that's why I felt like the veil was lifted. I was just seeing the impact that this thing had on so many people, and we were winning as well. So it was just this momentum was building, and people were excited, and it was kids excited, and the stories that came out, I was like, well, this has always been here, but now it's just been brought to our consciousness. So that forms a really solid reason inside yourself, and you're like, why am I doing this training session? Like, or there was a lot less for me of, I have to go do this extra run, or I have to chase your man back, whatever. It was like, oh, I've got a really strong reason for doing this now. And I felt that with 40 other guys. Yeah. So powerful.
And as you said, it's always there.
It's there.
It just takes having a conversation with everyone in the room.
Yeah.
No one like running out the dressing room.
Yeah.
Like everyone just staying in the room, having that conversation sober You know, like
Yes,
because a lot of
that's a
I
great
know
point.
from playing myself, like a lot of the time, these conversations would happen in 2s and 3s and 4s at the end of a season after a load of pints,
Yeah.
perhaps, and then that's it for the season. See you next year. But like when you do it in the middle of the season, with the peak yet to be reached, then you know you're not looking in the rear view mirror. You're actually looking ahead, and you're saying, "This is what we're working for."
That's so interesting you say that, because it's so true. You finish the season, few drinks, lads are buzzing, getting on well together. Then there's a month or 6 week gap until you're back for pre-season training. By the time people get back, there's a bit of a sheepishness going. We're kind of connected a bit there, but I haven't seen you in 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So feck, we'll go back to blinkers on. We'll go for the season here.
Yeah.
And we've been in a weird situation this year, is that we got to the top of the mountain, whatever, played the game, but now we have another game. So the lads had all of the buzz, all of the crack. We've worked with yourself. Now we're back training again. We trained last night, and it's just the crack, the connection, the buzz there is it's amazing. Like, but you never really get to see that with a lot of sports, because there's usually you get to the end and then there's a break.
Yeah.
So you get that shared sense of achievement and celebration or whatever it might be, but then there's a big gap and you come back and you're like, fuck, geez, I told your man a lot there, over a few points there that night, but I hope he doesn't remember it.
Yeah. Like one thing that I think is important to say is that like letting your guard down and being vulnerable is not like probably advisable for an athlete or a team to reach top performance. If you're vulnerable and had the guard down all the time, you need to have that. I feel like you need to have that like protective layer and like, you know, mission focused and very functional. But like it's just adding an extra department onto it that actually like underpins all of the other functional work that you're doing. So it's kind of giving the, you know, having the meaningful conversations. But then, as you said, when you need to go back to work, you know, and you're charging on together.
That seems to be an issue in most areas of kind of wellness, health, physical health, nutrition, everything. Most of us don't have the capacity to be able to adapt what we're doing to the specific situation. We're just at a certain level all the time. So there's people who can never switch off, or there's people who can never switch on. There's people who can never engage, or people who can never disengage. But having the skills to do it when it's required, I think is really, really important. And that's kind of what you're maybe alluding to there, is that we can be emotionally vulnerable with each other in the right context. When we're out on the pitch, you don't want to be standing beside your man telling them how your day was and getting a bit upset. You want to give them an old done and get on with the game.
A brother.
Yeah, but then similarly at the end of the game, like I'm a big proponent of this. Like I can get pretty worked up on the pitch and pretty aggressive, but I'll always consciously after a game make a decision to go up and like shake hands with the lads and maybe have a chat with the opposition team and whatever, because like these are lads like me. As much as we're enemies on the pitch, we're not really enemies. It's a game at the end of the day, and we can have a bit of connection afterwards, which I feel better and they feel better and the whole thing is better. So being able to switch that on and off, I think it's a really important skill.
100%.
And if you don't develop both areas, there's a deficiency there. It's going to, and like I said, it's similar with nutrition and health and training and everything. There needs to be a push and a pull and an ability to switch between, depending on what the environment calls for.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And we've been kind of talking the whole time about this idea of you as a facilitator creating a safe space. And we've touched on briefly before. And again, I know a lot of this conversation, I always say this is about men specifically, but I am a man. I am surrounded by men. You work a lot with men. So it's not to say that this doesn't apply to women, but I hesitate sometimes to go too deep into women because I don't have a massive amount of understanding there. But with men, I definitely find a big issue with getting past this initial layer that we mentioned with the guys in prison specifically, is not having the right environment that they feel safe enough to express themselves. Because you said to me, men do want to talk, but oftentimes the environment isn't conducive to them talking, so they don't talk. And then it becomes men don't talk. It's not that they don't want to, but there is a right way, a right environment to do that. And it's something I've been conscious of. I look for it now in every element of my life. Is even with, I spoke to a guy once and he mentioned this idea of brother wounds to me. And I was like, the fuck is brother wounds? And he explained it to me, this idea of even when you're with your friends, your pals, your mates, your team or whatever, you're in a way comparing yourself to them, because we're not really in a tribe together anymore. Now it's all individual. I have my job, my house, my car, my family, my career, my progression, and it's separate from yours. We don't have a shared goal here. We have individual goals. They might be aligned, but you doing well in your job isn't necessarily beneficial to me. So we're separated in that way. So when I meet you, there's an immediate comparison. Even if you're my friend and there's a bit of crack and a few jibes, they're kind of loosely veiled probes to make sure, am I doing better than you? Are you doing better than me here? Because I'll judge how good I'm doing based on you. So we're actually hurting each other, and it's not a safe space to connect or be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I started, when I heard this first, I was like, that's interesting. I don't know if that applies really. Absolutely applies. I looked for it in all areas of my life, and I was like, there is an element of every interaction I have as a man that's guarded on my behalf and their behalf, and it creates this weird environment, and I don't necessarily feel like being vulnerable in that space. So why would they be vulnerable? So I started to play with that and just test the waters and be a little bit more vulnerable. Profoundly life-changing for me. How people around me responded to me being vulnerable was they were vulnerable because they felt safe. And I was like, okay, well, there's a version of a safe space. What you do is obviously a more group-focused, maybe a more focused safe space where people can literally come into a space and feel safe. I view this room as almost a safe space sometimes to have these conversations.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that, like, what you do as a podcast host, you whether you kind of verbalize it or not, you are creating safety with your guests so that they can speak. You know what I mean? If they came in here and they were like, got funny buzz off you, or they thought you were judging them, like they might be quite different in how they interact. But
did you get a funny buzz when you came in?
No.
You feel safe.
Lovely buzz. You gave me herbal tea.
I did.
And water.
It's a CBD herbal tea as well, so you might be getting an actual buzz off. A shout out to Ethos is there too. So
very nice. Yeah, like on that, like when I was working with the SOAR Foundation, and we used to go into groups of lads, running a program called the Voice program, which is a boys program. We used to speak about like what are the unspoken rules that you play by in this group. So there might be like 30 teenage boys in the room. They'd be like, what do you mean? It's like, okay, so like what are the rules that you play by unspoken? And like once they finally understand those, they might say like, oh, you have to take a slagging. When we mock your family members, that's okay. Don't talk about feelings, So they basically give you the unspoken rules that the group of lads play by. And then we might say, how's that working out for you? How's that going for you? Is that going okay? And then we're like, yeah. Some people might say, oh, I find it very limiting. I find it very restrictive. And sometimes I'm just like, will you ever shut up, like, and just stop talking shite? Can we just actually have a normal conversation about who we really are, and what's really going on? And so then you'll have, and so you'll offer them an alternative in the workshop and say, right, these are the rules that you're playing by. A lot of times they're actually, they're harming you. Like, there's like an anxiety or suppression of emotion, or there's a judgment, or there's maybe a toxic atmosphere in the group because of these rules that you're playing by. Do you want to just break the rules there for the next 2 hours and see how that goes? Try on a different hat. And then you can offer them opportunities to speak below the surface level, like about who they are, what's going on for them, their hopes and aspirations. Speak with a bit more heart. And what you'll notice at the end is, yes, they'll probably go back to their own rules, but they'll realize that they can actually, there's other ways of being, there's other rules that they can play by.
There's a lesson here for us, I think, in general, in society. And caveat to this, you did say that you don't want to be going around being emotionally vulnerable all the time, because it's not necessarily conducive to good health. But if you look at the state of the world today, how much angst and argument and tribalism and unconscious wounding of each other, I suppose. I often think about if we were able to maybe bring a bit more of that safe space into every element of our lives, not just when we go to do a workshop or when we go to therapy or when we come in to do a podcast. If that was just a little bit more trust and vulnerability in general. When you walk down the street, you don't side eye everybody you walk by, and maybe it's a smile, or maybe it's a how you doing, and you're genuinely asking how you doing, or. But that, I think that would have such a big impact on everybody.
It's like, it's a very like ideal vision, but like, that's what you have to aspire for, isn't it? Like, I like we're going back to the tribal, for like 99% of human history, we've lived in hunter-gatherer tribes, which were up to 150 people before they splintered off into...
Number,
yeah, exactly. And like, I suppose we're not made for living in these huge, big, sprawling suburbs and cities in some ways. So it's like, it's hard, like it's definitely boggles me as to how we can all find some harmony. But like, you know, one piece of advice my dad gave me years ago when I was 18 and I was in college, and I was starting to work with special needs. So he used to work with a great charity called the Cope Foundation. And for summers in college, I used to work as a care assistant each summer. And one morning, and the first morning I was going in, I was like lying in bed going, I can't do this. I just couldn't find it in me to go in and do this new role. And he said, and it's probably the best bit of advice I ever got, like, was he just said, like, you know, what would you do if your sister or your two brothers were in Cope? How would you want people to go in and treat them? And I said, oh, well, like with integrity, with energy, with care, and treat them with dignity. And he was like, okay. Well, he said, these are people's brother and sisters in here today. And it's like, I swear to God, I jumped out of bed. And, you know, for that couple of weeks, like, was doing some pretty, you're really supporting people who are mentally and physically like impaired, like, and but I must say, like, not only for that job but in life in general, like I always think of that quote that he gave me of just like, you know, if we can just look at each other like this is someone's brother or sister. Yes, they might be acting like a dick, or maybe they beeped you off the road, or maybe someone's being obnoxious, or your boss is being too loud or asking too many questions and whatnot. It's like, if we can just, pause a little bit and say, like, this is someone's brother or sister here. You know, they're trying their best.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not my cup of tea, but, like, let's just take a breath here.
It's real compassion, isn't it? That's what compassion is.
Yeah, and it's hard. Like, it's hard, isn't it? Yeah. For me personally, it all depends on how I'm feeling in myself. Like, how much compassion and patience I can have for somebody depends on how probably patient and compassionate I have been with myself in the previous days and weeks. You know, if I am at ease with myself, there's more space within me and to actually respond in a way.
Yes.
Whereas when I'm not good at myself, there's less space and I don't respond, I react, you know? So it's, I like, it's a cliche, but it does kind of come back to actually just like yourself. Like, it does come back to trying to find the compassion for yourself so that you can have the compassion for other people.
I think, like most cliches, they're cliches for a reason, because there's truth in there. Literally yesterday I had a conversation, I'm not sure if you know Adam Starr. He's a teacher of Buddhist meditation, and he said almost down to the word space that you used there, almost the exact same thing. I had Patrick McKeown in on Monday as well, talking about breath work, and he spoke about the exact same thing. This idea that if you don't have that sense of calm, peace, compassion for yourself, there's no way you can give it to somebody else. And like, when I think about practical ways this manifests in my life, if I'm anxious, angry, upset, late, whatever, everybody else is getting the sharp end of me. Like, they're all getting the sharp end of me. There was an ad a few years ago, I often reference, I haven't looked it up, so it was on Post ad maybe, or one of these courier services, and it was this story of I don't know, was it a child's teacher gave the child a hard time, the child went home and was upset and annoyed the father got annoyed and went in and shouted at one of his staff gave the DHL delivery guy a hard time, the DHL delivery guy turned out to be the partner of the teacher, and it was just this cycle of anger being passed along and externalized, because nobody taking a second to go, okay, why am I getting so pissed off here, why is, and then I'll pass this along to the next person who passes it along to the next person. So without creating that space for ourselves between the input, the guy cutting you off or someone shouting at you, and your output, is just going to be response and reaction and reflection of that emotion out into the world. Like, and we always circle around the topic, no matter what conversation we're having. You have to do the work a little bit on yourself, have a bit of compassion, look for that sense of calm in yourself. If you don't, how are you supposed to do it for somebody else? And I think that's a big problem. I wanted to add another element to what I said earlier on about us all creating a safe space or having a bit more compassion. I get it. Like, most of us are literally we're at 99% already now with jobs and children and life and illness and all the stuff that's going on. And then we're being bombarded with stories about wars and horrors and madness and the world is ending and the price of petrol's gone up and you'll never buy another slice of Brennan's for less than €2, and it's just constant input and negativity. So like, really, unless we consciously try, how are we ever going to have that space to have compassion for somebody else?
Yeah,
we're overstimulated. We're absolutely flat to the mat. So I have compassion. I have compassion for that element of it too. Again, it's not a get out of jail free card. It just means maybe there's a little bit more conscious effort that we have to put into it.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a difficult one to kind of come to terms with, and this is something I'm really conscious of every time. And I always say it on every podcast. Somebody listening now is going to go, the lads ever fuck off. Like, I'm too busy for this compassion bulge. Wasn't someone for a bit of compassion for me? But I think it's relative. It's not easy, but it's relatively simple to just reframe that. You have compassion for you, and then all of a sudden you realize that other people. Like you mentioned the sister thing. The biggest impact that I've ever had is realizing that other people are just a version of me.
Yeah.
It's the same as like if I would take care of my sister or my partner. If I was in this position, how would I want someone to take care of me? Oh yeah, that person is just a version of me. And I saw it. That's why I was mentioning on the show I was watching about the guys in prison. At one point, I was like, that could have been me. This is just some dude, and he's struggling. I've struggled like this before, but just based on my environment, I didn't go down this path of drugs or whatever. That's me. Like, it's madness. How quick. What did a woman I used to say with that? She used to say, I used to work with this woman, a lovely woman, Sandra, used to say, there for the grace of God go I. Because we dealt with a lot of people with addiction and stuff. And she was like, that could be me or you.
Yep.
Just our circumstances or where we were born, our environment, that could be me or you.
Yep.
So for me, I was like, fuck. Right now when I see stuff like that, I'm a little bit less quick to judge. I'm a little bit quicker to go, oh, fuck, that could be me. So
yep, exactly. And like one thing that I remind myself about with the compassion part of it for myself is, I'll give you an example. Like two weeks ago, I did a session with a company, and I didn't really feel it went as well as I thought it could have gone. And I noticed myself for days giving myself a hard time. Like, and I like, my girlfriend started noticing probably like that my mind was elsewhere. So I just said I'd sit down, and actually I said, I'm going to write down what I'm saying to myself here. Wow. And like I wrote down, it was like, you are not good enough at your job. You embarrassed yourself. They will never have you back. They think you're shite. Whatnot. A full list of commentary of what I was saying to myself. And I was like, look, is that how I want to talk to myself? Would I talk to anyone else like that? No, I absolutely would not. I definitely wouldn't.
Yeah.
If my best friend did the same workshop, what would I say to him? It's like, so I just wrote down on the other half of the page, then it's like, this is what I'm saying to myself. What would I say to my best friend? So I wrote down, tried your best. You learn fast. Some people got something from it, and I just like actually tried to balance it out a little bit. And it's, it's a nice reframe. Sometimes it's just kind of, how would I talk to my best friend?
Is there ever a period in your life or situations where you need to be a bit firmer with yourself? So not be as compassionate and be a little bit more kind of performance and focus.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. 100%. Like going into big weeks of work, for me, it feels like going into championship week when I used to play hurling. Like it's game mode. My mind is on. I'm going to bed at night, and sometimes I'm thinking of ideas, and I wake up in the morning and I'm writing, and try to remain sound to myself, like at the same time, but like there is a different look in my eye regarding like, right, just like this has to be done here.
Yeah.
And like it's not just to do with work, it's to do with like, life can be tough. Like sometimes, like if people in your life are struggling or I'm struggling, it's like there is a time where you just have to say, right, what needs to be done here, but also at the same time, looking out for yourself.
Yeah. What I love about the work that I do now, and the joys of what I get to, people I get to meet, and also the information that we all have access to now with social media and the world and the internet and all that, is I kind of view myself now as a hybrid. I'm this hybrid kind of thing, because we will get to the tribe thing now in a second. There's very extreme versions of everything that we speak about in this world. And I'll use specific examples here. There's the David Goggins. Get up, bitch. Move, let's go. And it's a hard line, no bullshit approach. get after it and don't take any prisoners, and don't take any prisoners with yourself either. Go and get the job done.
Yeah.
And then there's like the Peterson kind of model, which is more compassionate and go easy on yourself, but still take responsibility and still make your bed, but be a bit more compassionate. And then there's like the super extremes of Andrew Tate saying fuck you and fuck everybody else and get stuff done. But then there's the other side, which again is a little bit alienating for people, which is I'm just purely full of compassion and love all the time for myself and everybody else in the world. And that's not necessarily relatable. So having consumed all this content, I'm finding myself, I'm just in the middle, like almost everybody else should be, probably somewhere in the middle. I'll call on the Goggins when I need the Goggins. And I find personally, as a man, there's times where I'm like, you need a little bit of hard love. Like this is difficult. You can have compassion, but you gotta get this shit done. You can't just like sit here and hope that if you have love and compassion, it'll get done. You gotta get it done. But there's other times where, as you mentioned there, I'm being way too hard on myself, and maybe I need to call on a little bit more of the softness there. So the tribal element of this, where it gets a little bit murky, I find is a lot of the time now, because we're looking for this where do I belong feeling. There's a lot of people struggling to find where they belong nowadays. I'll pick a Goggins, and that's the name of my tribe. So now I live my entire life with the Goggins. I have an issue with Goggins now, but my entire life is Goggins. And you see this with personal development and growth. You see it with politics. You see it with identity. It's really tribal. But I think we fall into the trap of thinking if this is my role model or this is the tribe I want to live in, then that's how I live my entire life. And everything I do has an underlining of move, bitch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Like I think it's, I like what you say about the hybrid, because I'd be similar enough in terms of like, I personally think it's good to expose yourself to full range of what's out there and different stimulus and different subject matter experts and different, full range of knowledge, but then picking and choosing what you need for a different time. Like, for example, if someone's breaking into your house,
go.
Are you going to be like, oh God, maybe you're, like
maybe had a bad upbringing.
Maybe a bad day.
Sit down there now and we'll stick the kettle on.
Yeah. So like you have to embrace the different parts of yourself for the different experiences that you're having. Definitely. But do I find that people, regarding there's no doubt about it, people go towards the warmth where they feel like they belong, like in the prison. Even people like joining gangs, joining political parties and whatnot, like you're all receiving, people are looking out for cues that you belong. It's so like pervasive, I find, and I know I've used that word belonging an awful lot, but I feel through the work that I do, I see the world like through that lens a lot and see how people, whether or not the group is espousing positive or negative values and behaviours, people will go where they feel like they're valued and they belong, But in an ideal world, you're going to have role models and leaders of these groups that are espousing healthy values, that are inclusive and not harming other people, and, they can be as out there as you want. But I personally feel like if you can have a leader of a group and values of a group that are healthy and inclusive and non-damaging to other people, I think that's, people can do what they want.
That's where it gets tricky down now.
That is like, and that, you see, for me, that's completely subjective then.
Yeah.
It's like, what do I think is healthy, like, and inclusive? It would be very different for other people.
And then you create a power dynamic if there is a group and somebody becomes the leader of the group and maybe they have motivations that aren't necessarily aligned with the benefit of everybody in the group, and it just gets really, really messy.
Yeah.
Did you ever read the book Try by Sebastian Junger?
I did actually, ages ago.
Yeah, you're one of the only person I've ever mentioned the book to who's actually read it.
Yeah.
That, because you mentioned earlier on about Dunbar's number and tribes and feeling a sense of acceptance because your survival literally relied on it. And I just found his commentary on the evolution of humans since the 150 people in a tribe to now, and our kind of our hardware and our software hasn't really changed that much as humans. We still strive for acceptance and belonging and all these different things. We still feel vulnerable for the same reasons, because it might mean that we're no longer of value to the tribe or whatever. So literally our survival instinct is telling us to do these things. But in the environment we now live in, it's not necessarily conducive to a healthy mindset anymore.
Yeah.
Because now it drives us to do things that might not necessarily be good for us, but we perceive them as being good for our position in the tribe.
Yeah.
But there are really no tribes in that traditional sense anymore, the community side of things.
Yeah.
And I remember him speaking about like a sign of success now is a bigger house further from the road with higher hedges and a longer driveway, so you're more isolated from people, is a sign of success, because it means you've done well and you've money and all these different things.
Yeah.
But it actually means that you're more isolated from what
I remember that. Yeah.
you're looking for, which is a sense of connection and belonging.
Yeah.
And most because you said you use the word belonging a lot. I don't think you can overstate how almost every decision we make in our life is trying to be either respected, which shows acceptance, or connected, which means I belong here. These are my people. So you add in politics and you add in external motivating factors and incentives to people. It's just leveraging our human need for belonging and for connection.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes me. But I love that book. Tribe playing footsie under the table.
And like the part from the book that I remember, I forget an awful lot of books, but like the part that stood out to me was like the deep bond that was formed with the people who go to war, the soldiers who go to war, and that when they actually, when they leave, when they finish their time in the field in war, that like it's, you know, the PTSD of what they've observed is obviously a huge impact, but it's the bond, the deep bond that they had with their fellow soldiers.
And was something that
struggle to reintegrate.
Because they're back into this. They're back into this world now that we described earlier on, where beforehand it was me and my brothers or sisters focusing on this one goal, and we look after each other, we checked each other all together, and then you go into usually the corporate world, you get a job, and it's me against everybody else pretty much, because we're all looking for the promotion, and we're all looking to compete, and we're all looking for the nice house, and we're all looking for, but there's no sense of shared purpose, which has been a massive driving factor for me with what I do now and the business and stuff like that. I'm allergic to this idea of like individual growth, and even though I run my own business and I want to be successful, I'm kind of a lot more driven by how can we all like get a piece of this and all build something together that's kind of a bit more meaningful, and kind of remove ourselves from this kind of fighting, this kind of infighting and outfighting that we do. It doesn't feel right. It's not in alignment really. Like,
beautiful, nice that you found that.
Yeah, I'm finding it. It's probably a better way to describe it. Like, I'm not this person who's completely. I've got a really clear vision about where I'm going, but people like you, I wouldn't even have exposure to without having gone down this road. So it's starting to reinforce itself now, and I'm coming across people with a similar mindset, and building a bit of an echo chamber. But it's like, it's a positive echo chamber because it feels really, really good.
Yeah, nice.
A lot of what we spoke about today as well is kind of connected with this idea of masculinity and being a man. And you mentioned something that's like, it's almost like the figurehead of what most of these conversations boil down to, this sense of not being enough. Is that something, because a lot of the work you do is with men, is that something that comes to the surface a lot, this less than, this feeling of less than, or a lack of something, or not being enough of a man, or is it something you're familiar with and you come across a lot?
Yeah, like it wouldn't be verbalized in those words, but you can get a sense, you know, from groups that there might be that belief system within individuals. And that might kind of, I don't know how, they might demonstrate that by being particularly hard on themselves and speaking to themselves in a poor fashion. It might come across as, you know, slumped shoulders or looking down and like not wanting to engage. You know, it's definitely a theme that comes up for sure. Especially with, you know, with the work in the prison. You know, Gabor Mate in the course, he wasn't on the video, I'll say that again, but he was from the content that I would have learned from was that he'd speak about like how early life trauma, traumatic events can like shape our internal world, and they can implant certain beliefs within ourselves about ourselves and the world. So like, you know, that's, you know, I think that's for men and women. Of course, it's, you know, the beliefs that we have about ourselves and not being enough and not lovable. And, you know, the world is a scary place. Like, a lot of that comes from the early life. And yeah, I suppose it's, as you become an adult, I find it's, you know, and if you have the privilege of being able to work on yourself, not everyone has the chance to do that, but it's like just having a look at those beliefs that were born many years ago. How are they serving me now? You know, is feeling not good enough, is feeling unlovable actually helping me now? Or is it something, a kind of a cloak that I need to take off so that I can live a life where I do feel good enough and that I do feel worthy of what my life and what's around me. You know, Gabor Mate would have used that analogy an awful lot of, like a child in early life that would put on these. He'd actually used the analogy of an Eskimo in Alaska, putting on protective cloak to keep him warm because he needed that in childhood. So perhaps that belief was actually useful at the time, and they put on that protective personality or armor around yourself at that certain time in your life because it was needed. But then when the Eskimo moves to California, and in the adult life, it's like, what's that extra layer of conditioning and clothing going to do for this person? It's going to actually harm the health and even death and whatnot. So he always used the analogy of just actually in adult life, you know, looking inward and understanding that this cloak and this belief system is actually not relevant to now anymore. And with time and energy, hopefully you can shed that cloak and actually, that's the best analogy I can put on it.
With the work that you do in this group setting, I can imagine that sometimes when you do remove this initial layer of protection and the stuff that we walk around with, and people start to be a bit more vulnerable, it might bring some of this stuff up for people, these inherent traumas and these behaviours and stuff like that. In a group setting, that could be a difficult thing to manage. Does that come up often? And is it something you specifically look to work with, or is that kind of a next level, maybe one-to-one stuff, therapy stuff, things like that?
Well, I'm very conscious of the fact that, like, I studied psychology and I've like 10 years facilitating with different groups, and I've done that course with Gabor Mate, but like I'm very conscious of the fact, like, of my boundaries too. And I, especially in the prison where there's a lot of trauma, I say at the very start, like, after doing my intro and giving context about the work, the program, I definitely like to put some parameters around it and say, like, there's going to be some stuff here that there's going to be some stuff that you're going to want to keep to yourselves, and we've all had events in our lives that we want to keep to ourselves and experiences, and I say, like, you keep that to yourself, and if you need to have one-to-one therapy or counselor, that's the place for certain conversations. But how I like to, the visual I like to give is that, like, the iceberg, right? So like 90% of it is under the water, 10% is over the water. And I like to say that day-to-day surface level conversations on the landing or in the dressing room or in the boardroom, like, that we have on the street, like surface level conversations, they're, perhaps functional again and non-emotional, and they're small talk and maybe having crack. Below the surface level, right down at the end of the iceberg might be your deepest traumas and your deepest hurts and your deepest fears and anxieties and whatnot. And I just make it very clear, like I say, like, we're not going down to the end of the iceberg here. One, it's none of our business. Two, we don't have time for that as a group, because we've an hour and a half. We'd be here all day. But what I would invite you to do is lower the water line down just a little bit. So you're going to give the visual of, we're not going down here, and we're not going here, but we're going to lower the water line down a little bit. And I find that at least gives people parameters within themselves to say, okay, look, I'm going to be a bit more generous with myself here than usual. I'm not going to jump in here, but we're going to actually lower the water line down a little bit. I think that gives people a nice gauge. And, if anyone ever does need that extra support following on from a session, I'll always try to link them up with some support services if needed. But like when you're working with people, this is what I've learned, is like the safety and well-being of the people that are in the room is, like, first and foremost, and whenever you're delving into these conversations, it's, you have to remind yourself that how significant they can be for people. So, and also, Dan, something that is really worthwhile remembering is that like in the space of 5 minutes, you can have tears and you can have depth and meaning, but you can also have like outrageous laughter and crack. And I think that that's unbelievably important when you're working with a team or you're working in the prison or teenagers. It can't all be the deep and meaningful conversations and like heartfelt. It has to be the crack too, because it's like you need that balance to actually, especially for lads. I find it's like if they're dipping into some vulnerability and different types of conversations of meaning, perhaps it's so important for them to have the crack too, because it shows them straight away afterwards. It's like, but I'm still me, you know, like, and lads, you know, like I have spoken about something meaningful here, but I'm still who you think I am. And that's important balance to have. I really can't stress that enough, is that, yeah, just to give people the choice rather than saying, okay, we're all going to be vulnerable now. No, it's not. Like we're going to be our full selves here, not just vulnerable.
I think that's massive, Ron. I think a huge resistance that I have found in like my peers, I suppose, normal guys with fairly decent average upbringings, is a resistance to this idea that if I engage in this thing, I'm going to become a deep, introspective, vulnerable person all the time now, and I have to become that. That's my new identity, as someone who, and there is a trap as well that I found, that you can fall into this constant work, and you identify with just doing the work, and you're just on this journey forever. And I often think about this, like what I used to read into a lot of like biohacking and personal development and sports development, and I'd just be constantly consuming the content. It's like, what's the point of all this? It's to actually live a better life. So as much as doing the work is important and being vulnerable and sharing, the reason you're doing it is so all of the experiences you have are fuller and almost more complete, or you're more present, or you feel more grateful. So the work is not the purpose, and the sharing and the vulnerability is not the purpose. The purpose is to enhance the quality of all the connections and the relationships.
I heard a great analogy years ago of like having a really nice car in the mechanic, and you have it up on the stills, and you're just like tinkering at the wheels, and you're tinkering at the engine and putting oil in it, and you're never taking it out for a drive. Like, you know, the whole reason to have it up on the stills, for example, is that you can drive it nicely. Like, and I always think it's a nice analogy. It's like too much work, I find, like, and too much introspection or reflection or working on yourself. Maybe it's for some people, but like, I think you got to take the car for a drive too.
It is another tribal thing. Like, you become the person, and it's quite chic at the moment to become the person who's into trauma. Like, oh, I'm exploring my trauma. It's amazing, but like, what are you doing with it? Are you taking it for a drive? Like, are you bringing it out there and testing it out with all the people in your life? Because that's where the real joy is. And that's where I found the joy, and I know with our group as well, it's that's the most transformative thing ever. It's just this joy now, this sense of connection, and it's all come from doing the thing. But we're now expressing what we've learned by doing the thing, which is beautiful, man. It's amazing.
Nice. Well, I like when it comes to, I think for groups of men, again, like, I think it's how you frame it. If you said, okay, if you said we're all going into a room here for 2 hours and we're going to be vulnerable together, I can guarantee you half of them won't turn up. And they'll go in and they'll be like sitting right down the back, and they'll be like on their phones, like, you know. But if you frame it in a way that it's, you know, you're not detracting from you as a person or taking from you, you are adding more to the person. You're making you more full, healthier, better dad, better friend, better able to have a conversation with your buddies. And also hopefully a better team as well at the same time. So it's like that New Zealand phrase of better people make better teams. No, better people make better players. This from the All Blacks, and I just think it's true. It's true. I think it's all tied in. It's all one big spiral.
For sure.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I think everything's connected. Like, I don't think there's any topic that we could discuss here that involves human beings that doesn't tie in some way with what you've discussed here today. Connection, trust, vulnerability, belonging. I don't think there's any single topic that you can talk about that doesn't actually link in some way with what we've discussed here. I won't keep it too much longer. Now, there's a couple more small questions I just want to ask you. First of all, you've mentioned a couple of times emotional resilience and emotional intelligence. Could you maybe just give us a bit more definition on those terms, because they're thrown around a lot, and I'm not sure if we really understand what they mean.
Like for for me, the emotional intelligence, there's a couple of components to that, and it would be a person's ability to express themselves, so verbalize their internal world. Person's self-awareness would be another one. So it's like a person's ability to gauge what's happening within them. So like differentiating between their thoughts, their feelings, and maybe their bodily sensations. So like awareness of yourself. Self-awareness of how you impact other people. So like, how do you impact people in your environment? That's self-awareness as well. Empathy would be another pillar of emotional intelligence. So like, when somebody's feeling a certain way, can you connect with that feeling? Can you find that connection between you and that person? There's emotional regulation is another part of emotional intelligence. So like, if I'm in a meeting and somebody upsets me, can I actually am I going to have an outburst of anger and throw a fit, or can I actually hold myself in the moment? So there'll be some of the components of emotional intelligence. And the resilience part of it, it's all tied in, but resilience, if you think about the scientific term of resilience, is actually they do experiments on tennis balls, and they'll have it in a vice, and they'll put the tennis ball in a vice, and when they release the tennis ball, resilience of the tennis ball is its ability to return to its original shape. So for human beings, when we're building resilience, it's to withstand pressure, change, and also retain our sense of self and well-being throughout that storm, perhaps. And I suppose I've given two definitions of that there, but
No, makes
that's
sense.
that's where the I know we said about overdoing it on the self-work, but that's where the work is important, because if you can understand emotional intelligence and understand resilience, then we can actually live more, we can withstand the winds and the storm and the rain of life, a bit more, so when you're working on yourself, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for everyone around you as well, as people know.
And it seems to link in a lot with what you said earlier about just being able to generate that space. That's something that kind of seems to be a foundation of it. Because if you can generate a bit of space between you and your emotions, all of a sudden you can be aware, you can observe, you can see the impact they're having on you, on other people. But without that bit of space, which I feel is what most of us lack nowadays, because we're also, as I said earlier on, overstimulated and so busy and so overwhelmed and overworked, and there's no space. And there's a quote by, don't let me forget it, Blaise Pascal, French philosopher, Blaise Pascal. And this is not the exact quote, but this is a butchering of the quote. But
you're going to do it in a French accent?
Bonjour, Blaise Pascal. Okay. Most of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly by himself for 5 minutes. That's a loose description of the quote, but that's the space. That's just the space I found anyway, even just being able to sit for 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, it's like I said before, it's like a psychedelic experience sometimes. You're sitting and you're like, whoosh, holy shit, I reacted really badly here, and I said this here, and I had this argument here where I was 100% convinced I was justified, but actually now looking at it, maybe I was a bit angry there, maybe I was a bit emotional, and oh God, it really hurt this person. And it's literally as simple, it has been as simple as that for me anyway. Just creating that little bit of space has allowed me, because when you think about a lot of the stuff you've said today, and again, I'm familiar with sitting listening to people speak or podcasts or having conversations and getting really frustrated. And you've talked about 25 different things there in all these different areas. I don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. I don't have time for this. So that little bit of space for me has been kind of the key that's unlocked everything. Because now you can sit back and just observe yourself a little bit. Observe the emotions, observe the day. And people are pretty damn smart. Once you give them the opportunity to observe, they'll pick up on things. Most people will be able to identify, and some people need help, obviously, and most of us actually need a little bit of help, but most of us will be able to identify areas where maybe, Jesus, that's something I could maybe do a bit of work on there. Why don't I just start there?
And I did want to say this, that's when I was thinking about this podcast in preparation for it, I was thinking about what I do, and I know it's a very, it's a niche area in many ways, but I was just thinking, there's such power in groups, there's such power in groups, such learning about there's such a rich opportunity for growth for individuals when they're in a group. And like you're talking about self-development, for me, that's not an isolated endeavor. Like, it can be done in a group, because a group will hold you accountable, and a group will hold a mirror up to you in ways that you perhaps can't do yourself, and a group also has a whole ocean of wisdom that they can share with you about their journeys, So it's like, once we get those conversations going about our journeys in a group setting, there's so much wealth of wisdom that can be shared within that, which is why I love the group work. It's fascinating, and it's a very ancient kind of feel, like.
Absolutely, which kind of almost answers the last question I was going to ask you here, was if someone is listening here and they're in some way touched by what you said, or they feel something, what would be, and I know it depends because everybody is different, but what would be a good place for somebody who really has no idea where I should start with this? What would be maybe a good thing to start exploring, to maybe just build some momentum for themselves, to maybe start generating some space, or build a little bit of emotional intelligence, etc. Where would you recommend that people kind of start?
Well, to one part of your question there, the space and the emotional intelligence, like for me personally, like meditation is massive. I use a great app called Waking Up by Sam Harris. I think it's fantastic. It's very clear and clean, and that's very good for building my understanding of my inner world, my inner landscape. What am I saying to myself? Just checking in with myself, as you said, giving yourself that space. So that's one for me. There's plenty other apps. And there's another fella called Daniel Siegel, and he has a meditation technique called the Wheel of Awareness, which I find is fantastic. And it separates out your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations, your breath. And then it comes back to the part of yourself that's observing it all. Probably has to be experienced to be understood, but yeah, it's great. There's a video on YouTube. But then regarding, like, people wanting to find that sense of belonging and connection, the phrase like find your tribe, like I think it's very true. I think the full, beautiful, diverse world that it is, there is a tribe for everyone, and I think if that's, collecting old dirty wheels, or stamp collecting, or hurling, or playing music, or dancing, or looking at like paper planes, like Paper Plane Club. There is a tribe for everyone, and the beauty of the internet is that they're very easy to find. And I think if you can take that initial risk and reach out and ask to be invited into that group, and go along and be generous with yourself as well, and be just be trust I think is important when you're entering a group. Giving the group trust. I think if you feel it feels right, then the sense of belonging will take care of itself.
Yeah, and I would also maybe this is not going to be correct, but don't lose yourself within the tribe as well.
Yeah.
Find a tribe, but maybe find yourself within the tribe too. I find that's been important for me anyway.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I'm sure, absolutely positive, that people are going to be extremely interested in your work after listening to this. Is there a way that people could potentially reach out to you or work with you, even if it's not necessarily team-based? Are you open to people having conversations with you, maybe reaching out and asking for some advice? And
yeah, I would never say no to that. But just like, I suppose they'll have a good sense of who I am by the end of this conversation, I think. But feel free to reach out. My email address is on the website.
I'll have it in the show notes as well.
And thank you. I appreciate you having me on. And it's nice to have it's rare that I actually have spoken about myself and my work for this long.
Yeah.
But I appreciate how you've done it, and it's been a lovely conversation.
I just want to express my absolute gratitude for you on many different levels. Obviously, I'd call your friend now as well. We've worked together and we've now done the podcast together. It's genuinely a pleasure. to know you, and it's added massive value to my life. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Nice.
I want to thank you for your time today also. And I know, because I've only gone through half my list here on the book, that I'm probably going to ask you to come back on and maybe explore some more topics with me in the future, if you'd be open to that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Top man. Thank you, Dan.
See you next time.
Sound.